Australia is a continent known for its natural beauty, sandy beaches, deserts, and in some places, bushland. At the same time, Australia is one of the most highly urbanized countries with megacities such as Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth. Snapper Point is an Australian conservation area located near Fraser Park Beach, near Catherine Hill Bay, New South Wales. The area around Cape Snapper Point attracts intrepid tourists who climb it in search of unforgettable shots, as it is made up entirely of steep, uneven volcanic rocks. On April 24, 2016, at 10:30 a.m., a group of hikers walking at the foot of the promontory noticed something large floating on the surface of the water. They reported the find to law enforcement. The police arrived on the scene and removed an unknown package. Upon examining the find on shore, they discovered the body of an unknown woman with multiple injuries, indicating that the victim had been brutally assaulted. She was not identified, but news accounts described her as an Asian female between 20 and 35 years old of average height. 5 years earlier, a major airport in northern Sichuan province in the People's Republic of China saw off 20-year-old Ms Leng in a torrential downpour. The girl tearfully said goodbye to her beloved mother. After the death of her father in 2008, her mom became the closest person to her. She flew from her native China to faraway Australia, where she had dreamed of studying since her childhood. 11 hours later, the plane landed in Sydney. It was the first time Ms had made such a long journey alone, but she was in a hurry to achieve her dream, so she easily overcame any difficulties. She was met at the airport by her own aunt and her son, who was only 2 years younger than Ms. The oldest and most populous state in Australia is New South Wales. 1 in 3 Australians live in its territory. It was here that Ms' early years were spent after moving here. Since coming to Australia, Ms has lived happily with her 48-year-old aunt, her young husband, Barrett, and with her cousin in their camping house. The girl had a private room where she spent almost all of her free time. Ms loved to read and draw, so she would spend hours in her room pursuing her favorite hobbies. For the convenience of living in another country, Ms changed her name to Michelle. Ms Leng enrolled at the University of Technology in Sydney, where she successfully studied economics and hospitality management. Michelle was very intelligent and motivated. She was not afraid of anything new and easily made new acquaintances. Like many girls of her age, she often posted photos in social networks, on which she drank cocktails with friends, as well as shots with extreme outings to dangerous places. By nature, Michelle was an adventurous person who could easily travel to Hobart for a vacation and regularly took day trips around New South Wales. In recent weeks, she posted videos from West Head Lookout near Sydney Harbour, photos from Resolute Beach, north of the city, from Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, and from Very Beach on the south coast. On June 13, 2013, she visited Snapper Point, where she fearlessly photographed herself on the edge of a cliff and posted this prophetic photo to her Instagram account. Michelle excelled in her studies, made new friends, and found a part-time job. Wishing to arrange her personal life, Michelle regularly communicated with guys on dating sites and went on trial dates. The girl had an active and busy life where she attended classes during the day and then hurried to work. On her weekends, she was sure to meet friends and visit unusual places. On April 21, 2016, Michelle met up with a friend at the mall. They had lunch together, did some shopping, then Michelle boarded a train at the train station. She got off at Campsie station around 4:30 in the afternoon and was never seen again. 2 days later, Derek went to the train station to meet his wife, who had returned from a business trip. Aunt Michelle asked Derek about his niece, and he said he had not seen her in 2 days. Derek Barrett had been unemployed for a long time, so he often stayed up late at the computer and woke up only in the afternoon, so it was obvious that he might not have seen Michelle. But the situation was such that nobody had seen Michelle since April 22nd, and her phone was switched off. Having called all Michelle's acquaintances and friends, the aunt became even more worried. She inspected the girl's room, but it was in complete order as always. After looking through the girl's laptop, the family concluded that Michelle had not returned from her date and perhaps something had happened to her. Michelle's absence was quite unusual, as she was in daily contact with friends and family members living in China and Australia. The next day, Michelle's aunt and her husband Derek went to the police station and filed a missing persons report. They also reported Ms Leng's disappearance to the Chinese embassy. On April 24, 2016, the body of an unidentified woman wrapped in a plastic bag was found by a group of tourists at Snapper Point. As Michelle's relatives in China and Australia searched for her, local news channels carried a report of the woman's body being found. A compiled sketch of the victim aired left no doubt Michelle had been found. It took the police 3 days to identify her after they made a sketch of her. From that point on, Ms Leng was officially listed as a missing person. An investigation was launched. After interviewing close relatives living with Michelle, the first theory was that Michelle had been attacked by an unknown guy who Michelle had planned to meet that day. On CCTV, cameras restored the movements of the girl on the day of disappearance. But on surveillance cameras and on a short train journey, Michelle was alone. According to her friends, she had no plans to meet anyone that day and was in a hurry to get home. Reviewing social networks and correspondence of the girl did not confirm the presence of a young man with whom she could meet. The version about a secret stranger who could have committed the crime was not confirmed. The results of forensic examination were expected. The autopsy confirmed that Michelle's body had multiple injuries. She had most likely tried to fight off her attacker and suffered multiple stab wounds. Police Chief Inspector Gary Jubilan said the interpretation of the situation is that Michelle was brutally assaulted before her death. But she was spotted on her way home and did not go out anywhere else. So who could have attacked her with such atrocity? The inspector also noted that most likely the perpetrator had deliberately chosen a very lonely area of such a beautiful place. After all, the body was found in an area frequented by tourists and fishermen, but the place was somewhat isolated. Forensics found that Michelle Leng's body had been in the water for no more than 48 hours, and more likely much less, meaning that the body had been dumped quite recently. The chief inspector of police said that although the location where the body was found was far from the entrance to the national park, there was a parking lot near the tourist attraction, and so it was possible that the body had been taken there by car. Homicide detectives studied CCTV and traffic cameras to determine Michelle Leng's last movements. They continued to contact her family members, friends, and co-workers for additional information. Also, in addition to the search efforts, interviews continued with relatives and acquaintances in the hope of reconstructing a picture of the event and establishing the full picture of relationships in the family where Michelle lived. Police Inspector Gary Jubilan said with certainty that from all the information that has been collected about Michelle, she was very responsible, always stayed in touch with her family, informing them where she was going, so there were serious fears that there was trouble when she disappeared. However, for 2 days, none of the family noticed the girl was missing or simply didn't want to notice. Police called Derek Barrett in for questioning as the last person to see Michelle alive. Investigators were skeptical of his accounts of nightlife and long daytime naps, so he was re-interviewed. The investigators began asking questions about his relationship with Michelle and asked him to remember the last time he had seen her. Unable to withstand the pressure of the interrogation, Derek refused to answer the questions and demanded a lawyer. Such strange and uncertain behavior led to a number of doubts, and Derek was arrested as a suspect. However, the arrest had grounds. On the eve of the interrogation, investigators checked his cell phone signal and found that he was in the same area where Michelle's body was found on April 24th. When police obtained surveillance footage from a parking lot that captured a car matching the description of Derek Barrett's vehicle in the early morning hours of April 24th, there was no doubt that he was there. Derek denied and claimed to the last that it was just a coincidence and the car was not his, but the footage was clear enough to prove his presence in the parking lot. Police have charged a man in the death of 25-year-old Ms Leng, whose naked body with multiple stab wounds was found in a blowhole on the central NSW coast. A 27-year-old man has been arrested and charged with murder. The news of the arrest and charge against Derek has left Michelle's entire family in shock. Police spoke to Michelle's mother, who was devastated by the news of her daughter's death. She rushed to Sydney to see the very scene of her only daughter's dream and death. The woman was still unable to comprehend her death. Derek Barrett, 27, married to Michelle Leng's aunt, was charged with the 25-year-old student's murder after police released CCTV footage capturing her last shopping trip in Sydney's central business district on April 21st and her drive home. The footage shows her shopping at a Pitt Street mall before boarding a train at St. James Station for a ride to Campsie in Sydney's southwest. Police believe Michelle returned to her family home in Campsie in the afternoon, where she lived with her uncle, aunt, and cousin. She is presumed to have been murdered in her home. Recall that the autopsy revealed that Michelle tried to fight off her attacker and was stabbed several times in defense, stabbing her more than 30 times in total. CCTV footage is believed to have captured a vehicle entering Lake Moanmoraic National Park at around 7 a.m. on April 24th. Police claim Michelle Leng's body was inside the vehicle. Despite Derek Barrett being detained and charged, the investigation continued. Gradually, other details of Michelle Leng's final minutes of life surfaced. Based on these, further charges were laid, including 5 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of installing a filming device, and murder. The investigation revealed that the suspect had an unhealthy sexual interest in his wife's young niece. When Derek Barrett's cell phone was seized and handed over to specialists to analyze and recover previously deleted data, the files found on the phone left no doubt that he was not only involved in Michelle's death, but had an unhealthy interest in her. It transpired that Derek had set up a hidden camera in the shared bathroom hidden behind toiletries and regularly reviewed the footage. The phone also contained images taken just before Michelle's death. Following these images, it was apparent that Michelle had returned home on April 21st around 5 p.m., and around midnight, she sent her last text message from her phone and had not been heard from since. Deep into the night, Derek Barrett began to put his devious plan into action. He entered Michelle's room again when she was asleep to perform the now customary shoot and satisfaction, but the girl woke up and Derek attacked her. He tied her up and put duct tape over her mouth to keep her quiet. The pervert kept her tied to the bed for 2 days and periodically abused her. In photos on his phone, investigators saw Michelle bound and naked, lying on the bed with a look of horror on her face. However, in these photos, Michelle did not yet have the injuries from which she died. Derek's last picture was taken around 8 a.m. on April 23rd, and at that time Michelle was alive. During the day of April 23rd, Derek's stepson Derek came home twice and did not hear Michelle's quiet moans. Derek was taking a shower at the time. Surveillance cameras determined that Derek left the apartment 4 times to take out the trash. Presumably by this time Michelle was already dead, and Derek, having showered and washed off traces of blood, thoroughly cleaned the house, hiding traces of the crime and Michelle's disappearance. On April 24th at 7 a.m., Derek drove to Snapper Point. On his way, he stopped at a gas station where he bought drinks and filled his car with gasoline. That's where he was caught on CCTV cameras. Upon arriving at Snapper Point, he disposed of Michelle's body and took some pictures around 9 a.m. Afterwards, Derek visited his parents, who noticed nothing unusual in his behavior, and then returned home to await his wife's return. With absolute equanimity, he reported several times that he had not seen Michelle, that the girl had not returned home, and cynically accompanied his wife to the police station to file a missing persons report. On June 29, 2016, the first court hearing was held. Barrett's lawyer, Bill Whitby, told Burwood Local Court that Barrett was pleading not guilty, and he was as shocked and upset by Michelle's death as the rest of the family. Michelle Leng's friends and family were in the packed courtroom. but Derek Barrett did not need to be present. He appeared later via video link. The fact is that the day before, the defendant reported that he didn't remember much in the hours before he killed Ms Leng because he had taken illegal drugs the day before. He also told the court that he had only vague memories of the 2-hour trip to Snapper Point, where he threw Ms Leng's body off the cliff. On this basis, before attending the court hearing, Derek Barrett was examined by a psychologist. However, forensic psychologist Dr. Richard First disputed the defendant's claims of memory loss. He testified and found Derek Barrett mentally fit to be punished to the full extent of his sentence. Dr. First testified that the drugs the suspect was taking did not cause memory loss. The doctor claimed that all of his actions were clear and purposeful, from the murder to the disposal of the body. Respected forensic psychiatrist Dr. Richard First also stated that Derek Barrett's IQ, concentration, and memory were within normal limits. He also did not believe Barrett's claims of memory loss and said the number of stab wounds indicated sadistic tendencies rather than memory lapses and acting on emotions. The psychologist also rejected Derek Barrett's claim that he did not feel sexually attracted to the victim. He bound, gagged, and stabbed the girl 30 times, but Derek Barrett claimed he had no memory of this. Dr. Richard First also told the court that the accused faked amnesia to mitigate his responsibility for the crime after he claimed he could not remember the period when he apprehended and killed Ms Leng. Speaking at the trial, Derek Barrett tried to explain his crime by claiming that he was addicted to illegal drugs. However, this fact was also challenged by the doctor. Richard First pointed out that Derek's claim was self-defeating because it was obvious that the suspect had gained weight during that time period. Judge Wilson said that in his 30 years as a criminal defense attorney, he had never seen an obese, substance-dependent person. But unfortunately, there was nothing sincere about Derek Barrett's behavior in the courtroom in Sydney. Derek Barrett's behavior in court gave the impression of a psychopath. His crime was not the result of a drunken night out, some poor life choices, or childhood abuse. In August, at a retrial hearing, Derek Barrett pleaded guilty to murdering and kidnapping Ms Leng, as well as twice sneaking into her room while she slept and making videos. He also admitted taking 19 explicit photos of Ms Leng shortly before her death. Barrett said he could not remember the 48-hour period during which he killed the girl, including cleaning up the crime scene and dumping her body, because he was under the influence of illegal substances. He said his only memories were of an argument, blood in the bathroom, and the terrified face of his niece screaming at him. However, Judge Wilson said she did not believe Derek Barrett was telling the truth about his memory loss, nor did she believe he was truly sorry for what he had done. The Leng family consoled each other while Derek Barrett wiped away tears, telling them, "I deserve to live. This should never have happened." Passing sentence, Judge Helen Wilson went even further. She said it was a depraved and sadistic act committed by a person in a position of trust with Mrs. Leng. As the judge detailed Derek Barrett's fantasies and actions in front of a packed courtroom, he stared at the floor. He was no longer enjoying the attention, and it was abundantly clear that he had failed to fool anyone. Obviously, the events that had occurred must be seared into his brain, but the killer claimed they were nothing more than flashes in his memory because he had taken drugs a day or two before. He never flinched once in the court sessions, repeating his victim's name over and over again. Speaking to the court, Chief Inspector Gary Jubilin of the NSW Police Homicide Unit said the crime was horrific and senseless. "From an investigative point of view, it's nice that we got justice, but there's no joy in a case like this," he said. Judge Helen Wilson sentenced 28-year-old Derek Barrett to 34 years and 6 months in prison for his crime, with a maximum term of 46 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2050. Barrett showed no emotion when he was sentenced. Michelle's mother, Mrs. Zhang, thanked the Australian and Chinese communities for their support at a time when she is suffering greatly. She also thanked the NSW police including Detective Inspector Gary Jubelin of the Homicide Squad, for investigating her daughter's death. A fund has been set up to pay for Ms Leng's funeral and to support her mother when she returns to China. But Michelle Leng's sad story did not end there. 4 years after the crime, inexplicable events occurred in one family. A woman often visited her elderly mother, and on one of these visits she found her sitting in a chair in the kitchen with an unknown USB device in her hands. When the daughter plugged the USB drive into her computer, she saw that it contained graphic videos and photos of obscene content and contacted the police. The thumb drive contained 9 video files that lasted more than an hour and 13 files, with photos of Michelle Leng being abused shortly before she was murdered on April 23, 2016. The woman had no discernible connection to Derek Barrett, lived about 4 miles from his former home in Campsie, and it is not known where the USB drive came from or how it came into her family home. Police were able to match the photos to those that Derek Barrett deleted from his phone before his arrest in an attempt to hide his crimes from police. In 2020, Derek Barrett was charged with a number of sex offenses after videos of him abusing Michelle Leng were found on the USB drive in November 2019. But police and prosecutors admitted they were at an impasse over the discovery of the device, which led to the new charges. Prosecutor Hugh Baker told the court that the elderly woman with dementia was confined to the house and only went out into the yard. There is no explanation as to how the USB drive ended up in the woman's hands at the house in Strathfield, Baker told the court. Based on new facts and evidence, Derek Barrett has had his sentence extended without parole after images found by chance revealed the full extent of his abuse of Michelle before he murdered her. This horrifying, depraved secret, found by chance in the hands of an elderly woman in a leafy Sydney suburb, resulted in the convicted criminal receiving additional years of deserved punishment to his already lengthy sentence. Friends and acquaintances honored Michelle Leng on Chinese and Australian social media. Every story wants to be summarized, to break it down into its components in order to approach and understand whether it is possible, by changing the chain of events, to prevent bullying, fear, and crime. Obviously, unemployed Derek Barrett had nothing to do. The young man was in the active phase of puberty and physical strength, lying at his computer all day and night, doing nothing, and demons took hold of his rotten soul. Perhaps if he had been working, there would have been no strength or desire for lust. But in this story, Derek's laziness, Aunt Michelle's pity, and her cousin's indifference played a cruel trick on her that cost her 2 days of humiliation, fear, and pain. Dear friends, cherish life because you never know which day will be your last. The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while, her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and the measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage, and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Tarmas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? Police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, He drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Wenning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Wenning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. We will never forgive him for what he did to our family, said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers, added her stepfather Wayne. Callahan's attorney Stuart Grieve said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing. We are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. A broken vase can never be mended, goes the famous saying, symbolizing irreversible harm or betrayal. A fragile vessel may be pieced back together, yet its cracks linger, forever altering its appearance and utility. This analogy hits close to home for survivors of intimate exploitation. Historically, our society has often tried to diminish the pain of such experiences to avoid causing discomfort to others. However, our culture and legal systems have evolved. Individuals who have suffered these indignities are now sharing their stories and receiving the support they need, propelled by dire incidents that could not be ignored. Among these is the tragic story of Antonia Barra from Chile, around which the entire national community rallied to ensure justice was served against her aggressor. The loss of the young woman became known on the evening of October 13, 2019. Her family could never have envisioned how that day would conclude. Her sister Carla, visiting their parents' home, went upstairs to say hello to Antonia, expecting a casual chat. However, finding her seemingly asleep, Carla chose not to disturb her and headed to the door. Before she could leave, she heard Antonia ask about their mother and request the light be turned off. After telling Carla she loved her, Antonia turned away. Maybe she's just tired or not in the mood, thought Carla. Little did she know, Antonia was grappling with harrowing thoughts that left her feeling there was only one way out from her profound distress. By 7 that evening, their mother, not hearing any response from Antonia's room, entered to find a harrowing scene. Her daughter was motionless, suspended above the floor. Marcella rushed to her, finding no signs of life. Overwhelmed by shock, she sought assistance from neighbors. The family friends helped take down the body and called for emergency services. Shortly afterward, Alejandro Barra addressed the media, vowing to uncover the root causes of his daughter's desperate act and to seek justice. Known for her vivacity and intelligence, it was clear that something significant had profoundly impacted Antonia. The autopsy confirmed self-strangulation as the cause of death. The case required immediate action. Not waiting for official inquiries, the parents initiated their own investigation. Private detectives meticulously pieced together the last days of Antonia's life, identifying the individual who had driven her to despair. Promptly, Alejandro and Marcella reported Martin Pradenas to the police, suspecting him of exploitation. There was little known about him. He was born and lived in Temuco, Chile, the same city as Antonia. He came from a large family, parents, a sister, and a brother. The dynamics within his family are unclear, as there is scant information available online, which is justified later. Undoubtedly, in his early youth, a young woman named Daniela Alvarez bore his child. Nonetheless, the relationship between the two did not last long. After the birth, the couple parted ways. Detectives discovered that between 2015 and 2017, Antonia and Martin communicated via a social network. At that time, Antonia was a teenager. They exchanged messages and commented on each other's photos, though their interactions were confined to the digital realm. However, they eventually met in person, which unfortunately led to a tragic outcome. Antonia was born in the late 1980s into a strong and close-knit family. The Barra family home was large and spacious, suited to a family of their size. Loving parents Alejandro and Marcella raised 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. It was a household where care and attention were plentiful. The children were kind and well-behaved, causing no significant trouble. However, Antonia stood out among her siblings. She was unusually perceptive, responsible, and ambitious from a young age, which made her a particular source of pride for her parents. She excelled in school, got along well with her teachers, and had plans for her future. Antonia dreamed of traveling and leading a fulfilling life. After graduating high school, she got into her university of choice and began studying a highly sought-after major. As a freshman, she immersed herself in mastering the basics of her future profession and actively participated in academic and social activities, making new friends. Her friends shared her interests and aspirations. Antonia formed an especially close bond with Consuela Uribe, who was studying at the law school. The friends would often go out, shop, and attend parties together. They became very close. Thus, when Antonia broke up with her boyfriend Rodrigo, Consuela suggested she distract herself from the heartbreak. Antonia was struggling with the breakup, so she embraced her friend's idea. She wanted to clear her mind and temporarily forget the past. The friends planned a trip for Chile's Independence Day on September 18th. Their destination was the tourist town of Pucón. By sheer coincidence, it was there that Martin and Antonia's paths crossed again. Martin was planning to attend an electronic music festival. The event was to be held at a local club called Black Room, where a DJ friend of his was performing. On September 17th, around 6:30 p.m., Uribe and Barra set off for Pucón with 3 other friends, one of whom was Consuela's boyfriend. The journey went smoothly, and upon arrival, the young people stayed in different accommodations. The girls stayed in a summer house owned by the Urad family. After 8 p.m., the friends began preparing for a party at the popular venue, Black Room. The night promised a sea of unforgettable emotions. Before leaving, Antonia exchanged messages with her father, who asked her to be careful and cautious around strangers. In response, she reassured her father, writing that prudence was her foremost trait. Law enforcement officials repeatedly interviewed Martin Pradenas, but he denied any wrongdoing regarding Antonia. He claimed their intimacy was consensual and vehemently denied any involvement in her tragic end. However, detectives had their own perspective and evidence regarding the matter. During the investigation, it was established that Martin left Temuco on September 17th around noon, accompanied by friends. They planned to return the next day. Upon reaching their destination, the group held a party at a rented house, filled with conversation, jokes, and of course, alcohol. Meanwhile, Antonia and Consuela got ready and headed to the club. There, they ordered a table, food, and drinks. The friends enjoyed themselves, chatting and dancing extensively. Needless to say, the Black Room Club became the venue for the young people's unexpected reunion. The chance meeting delighted them, and the man and woman spent the evening together, chatting and dancing. It was clear they were fond of each other. Antonia occasionally left him to return to her friend, who was also enjoying herself, and to greet the male acquaintances with whom she had traveled. Moving from one bar to another, she didn't realize how carried away she got with the alcohol, likely due to the long drive and an empty stomach, something she usually did not allow herself to do. Around 6:45 a.m., Consuela found her friend pleasantly chatting with a mutual acquaintance, Emilio. At that point, she told Antonia it was time to leave. Antonia refused, feeling good and wanting to continue the evening. Her friend advised her to stop drinking and reconsider her decision, but Antonia was adamant and chose to stay at the club while Consuela left. This turned out to be a regrettable decision for Antonia. Emilio became an unwitting witness to the events that unfolded afterwards, which he detailed during the investigation and in court. He noted that Martin approached Antonia and started a conversation with her. He then took her by the hand and led her towards the exit. Emilio remarked that Antonia acted oddly, unsure whether she was engaging in the conversation or just confused due to the alcohol. Nevertheless, it seemed she did not mind being led away, or perhaps she was unaware of it. Emilio assumed that the man had invited her to join him, and she agreed. Nonetheless, external surveillance footage told a different story. Martin's friends recounted that they left the club in 2 cars, but there was no room for the pair in either vehicle. Therefore, they proceeded on foot. Along the way, they came across a store. Surveillance footage made it clear that the man coerced the woman into entering. She could barely stand and was unable to resist. Martin, slightly more sober, was able to somewhat control the situation. Throughout the night, they were captured on camera several times. Along the way, Credinas was overly affectionate and tried to kiss his companion, who did not reciprocate and tried to pull away. Upon entering the rented house, none of his friends paid much attention to the woman. Only 19-year-old Barbara, who had joined recently and hadn't been drinking, noticed that the couple was intoxicated. Afterward, they went upstairs. Around 9 a.m., Consuela received a voice message from her friend. Initially, she couldn't make out what was being said. After listening more carefully, she understood a few words. Antonia was pleading to be picked up. Since her friend didn't know her exact location, she used GPS to find it. Consuela, accompanied by her boyfriend Jose, went to the designated location. Upon entering the house, they were met by a naked Martin, who was covering himself with a pillow. When Consuela asked him where her friend was, he claimed he didn't know. They found Barra in one of the upstairs rooms, lying on a bed in her underwear, quietly crying. Jose picked her up and carried her to the car. Consuela asked what had happened, but Antonia could only cry. The young couple tried to console her, hugging and attempting to engage her in conversation. Back at the summer house, Antonia confessed everything. Martin had exploited her against her will, and she felt powerless to stop it. Her memories were hazy. She couldn't recall much, but one thing was clear. He had wronged her. This occurred when they went upstairs. Afterwards, he left her alone and disappeared. Upon hearing about the incident, Jose and Consuela insisted that Antonia report the scoundrel to the police and seek justice. However, she refused, fearing that her parents and the public would find out. She chose to quietly endure the trauma and try to recover on her own. She asked them to tell no one about the incident. During this heartfelt conversation, Antonia received a message from her father asking how she was doing and joking about whether she had been drinking too much. To avoid arousing suspicion, She tried to respond in her usual manner, thereby inadvertently highlighting her own intentions. The next day, Antonia met with Martin to talk. However, he was dismissive and arrogant. He insisted that the events of the previous night had been consensual. At that point, Antonia realized that she would not hear the truth or receive an apology. She knew she had to try to move on. Later, psychotherapists invited to the court hearing will explain that at the time, Antonia was experiencing intimacy trauma syndrome. It's characterized by disruptions in physical, emotional, cognitive, and interpersonal behavior. This condition can appear immediately following the incident or even months, and sometimes years later. The poor girl was suffering through an acute stage alone. She could not rid herself of distressing sensations, distraction, anxiety, confusion, alternating with hysterics and crying. She undoubtedly felt a compulsive desire to cleanse herself, experiencing bouts of nausea or even vomiting. For 3 weeks, Barrett kept silent and tried to behave as usual. A childhood friend confessed that she noticed nothing unusual about her. However, her classmates could not overlook the memory impairments and disorganization associated with the syndrome. One of them remarked on her declining academic performance, which was very uncharacteristic of the once disciplined student. When asked what was the cause, Antonia cited poor health. It should be noted that a large number of witnesses came to the girl's defense during the trial: friends, acquaintances, and classmates. But what was the turning point in making a fateful decision? Perhaps Antonia would have remained alive, sought professional help over time, had it not been for a series of events. Somehow, her terrible secret became known to an ex-boyfriend. However, the information reached him in a very unflattering form, which he hurried to report. The girl replied that she was not at fault for what had happened. The information he had was a gross exaggeration. Then Rodrigo did not believe her. Moreover, the day before the incident, Martin called. It is unclear what the conversation between them entailed, possibly threats from his side. One thing is clear: the next day the girl was gone. A few hours before her death, she sent a farewell message to her boyfriend, and in a family chat, she shared a childhood video. In it, Antonia was dancing and laughing joyfully, showing how much she missed her former self. She could not return to her previous way of life, thoughts, and actions. This tragedy made a deep impression. Thanks to Alejandro finding the strength to share his daughter's story nationwide, her tragedy resonated with the public. Antonia's name was written on posters, in social media hashtags, even on building walls. Public support had an incredible result. In less than a week, women came forward with similar claims against Pradenas. 6 new charges were filed against his name, reporting actions he took from 2010 to 2019. The man turned out to be a criminal and was taken into custody. Concurrently, Martin's family petitioned to protect their personal information, which had leaked online. The family asserted that their constitutional right to honor and respect for private life was violated, citing numerous insults, aggressive messages, and fake information online. In these actions, the Pradenas family suspected, including the Barrett family. On June 12, 2020, the Temuco court granted their request. The judge required Antonia's relatives to refrain from disclosing information about the assailant's family through social media and from making compromising publications. This decision sparked outrage. Chileans were extremely upset, believing that it protected Martin. On July 21st, the Barra family filed an appeal with the Supreme Court, but it was rejected. Later that month, the suspect's lawyer submitted a petition for protective measures concerning his client. In the same month, he was officially charged with several attacks. Public outcry was gaining momentum. In Chile, the investigation became known as the Antonia case, a symbol of justice restoration for victims of violence. Many women, after many years, dared to come forward about their experiences. On July 22nd, an unexpected event occurred. The court changed the previously decided preventive measure from detention to house arrest. Martin Pradenas was effectively set free. At the same time, the judge explained that this in no way summarizes the presumed punishment. Meanwhile, the prosecutor charged Martin with 5 instances of misconduct, but the court only acknowledged 2. Massive protests swept across the country. Thousands of people took to the streets, outraged by the cessation of investigations regarding certain facts and the decision on house arrest. The authorities supported the citizens by sending a request to the appeals court. The judiciary responded immediately. It revoked the selected preventive measure and took Martin into custody. The same court later eliminated the statute of limitations for 2 cases of intimate violence. Concurrently, Alejandro, along with feminist organizations, worked on drafting a bill that would establish punishments for such crimes. He emphasized that no one should remain indifferent when a woman is led away by a man without resisting, especially while intoxicated. Barra stressed the importance of taking necessary measures in such cases, as this state makes a woman a potential victim. The investigation continued. In February 2021, Martin's phone was found. Forensic analysis revealed it contained photos in which the accused displayed women's underwear. He was clearly proud of his conquests and apparently kept account. The police report ran nearly 400 pages, including statements from victims and witnesses, people close to both Martin and Antonia, and those who had known them since childhood. The accused's childhood teacher recounted that Fredanis was a smart and cheerful child, but was very interested in topics related to intimacy. Some women recalled that when they were little, he touched them. At the time, however, no one thought much of it, as they were all children. On June 14, 2022, the criminal court in Temuco commenced its hearings, which were expected to last over a month. During this period, the prosecution presented a series of evidence, expert testimonies, and witness statements. The disclosed video footage clearly showed that Antonia was unable to control the situation. On August 26th, Martin was sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment for crimes against intimacy and acts of intimacy-related aggression. On December 29th, the Supreme Court accepted the defense's appeal, disagreeing with the verdict. A new trial was scheduled for spring 2023. Meanwhile, the efforts of the Barra family have an effect. The drafting of Antonia's law began, enhancing existing legislation to ensure that anyone committing an act of violence that pushed the victim to end their own life would be inevitably punished with imprisonment. On March 16th, the defendant's legal team resigned, and his case was taken over by public defense. Finally, on April 24, 2024, the second trial commenced for 5 cases of violence and 2 cases of forcible intimacy. During this time, Fredanis waived his right to remain silent and explained the events. He claimed that his crimes were committed under severe alcohol intoxication, to which the prosecutor responded that by drinking with the women, he made the victims vulnerable. On July 7, 2023, the man was found guilty. The federal prosecution demanded a sentence of 41 years in prison. On July 28, 2023, 31-year-old Martin Fredanis was sentenced to 17 years in prison for 7 intimacy-related offenses committed against 6 victims. Considering the time already spent in custody, he would serve 14 years. The tragedy that befell Antonia Barra helped expose a dangerous offender. It's unknown how many more innocent women might have suffered from his actions. The line between harassment and flirtation is very thin. One can never be prepared for someone deciding to cross that perilous line. However, the societal changes that have occurred have altered the perception of victims of violence. Now everyone understands the risks of uncontrolled desires and the inability to control oneself. Ultimately, the body and soul of another person are as fragile as a crystal vase, thus precious and inviolable.